where we are now, so we continue through the night and through the morning in terms of capturing and finalizing our counting. So this morning we had 23, and now we have 10 voting districts that are still busy finalizing their count. So there's 10. Obviously, once the count is done, we have a number of stages we go through in terms of ensuring that the result is then captured and completed. Now, what happens is that as soon as the count is done at the voting station, the IEC official in charge will complete the official result slip in duplicate. The party agents who are present are then at liberty to sign that result slip, and that result slip, together with the ballots used, unused ballots, etc., all the security material is rolled back to our local office. At the local office, our local official will then capture the result from the result slip onto our result system. There are then independent auditors who are present at these local offices of the IEC. They are professional independent auditors. They have their own unique codes in terms of which they will then be able to verify that what we have captured is in fact what was recorded at the counting center. In that way, we ensure that what is then on the system is then ultimately available on the leaderboard and then also on the website. What happens is that it's a seamless process, so when you see when the numbers change here, it's actually also changing on the website, it's changing on our own internal systems as well. So once we do that, so where we are now, so once our staff will capture, there will be a slight backlog as the auditors have to then verify and capture as well. So typically what will happen is if we are standing, for example, national ballot captured at 644, then we probably will be at 590 in terms of completed, because there's always a bit of a lag as the auditors obviously have to verify and check. So we are going through that particular process, and this is what you see. So once the auditor signs off, it goes through the process, and you'll see the impact on the leaderboard at the back as we're going forward. So at this stage, you can see we are at what, 35%? 35% is 35% of our voting districts. Remember, we have 1,572. Thank you very much. In terms of where we are. Yeah. And then once that is done, as I said, we finalize. We had a bit of a hiccup early hours this morning around 2 o'clock, where there was a power failure out in the Breda Valley. That is Worcester, Valiesdorp, T-Waterskloof area, caused by inclement weather. And the whole area was then lost electricity. That impacted on the counting at 57 of our voting stations in that particular area. We then were moving temporary lighting to those facilities, and fortunately before we could then deliver that, Eskom had restored the power, so they resumed. Being smaller voting districts, they could proceed to finalize the count, and then all the voting stations in that area were then finalized. So therefore, as it currently stands, of the 1,572 voting districts in the province, we still have 10 that are currently finalizing on their counting. Okay, and to give you an idea, for example, at the voting station that closed last, that is CBC St. John's out in the Parklands area, there were 27 ballot boxes. There were so many voters that we had 27 ballot boxes in all. So you can imagine when you have to open those back, sort, count, sort, count, sort, count. Just for interest sake, CBC St. John's has over 7,400 voters attached to that. The second largest one is Baston Primary, which is 7,835, also in the northern areas. But that just gives you a sense of, but those are of our biggest voting districts in our city. So that is really where we are in terms of that. Also, as a matter of interest, during the election day, that's on Wednesday, the IEC officials also visited the 34 correctional facilities within the province. There are 34, and that includes where a prison is also subdivided into a male-female facility as well as minimum-maximum security facility. And in total, going through to all of those 34 facilities, there were about 1,500 votes cast amongst the persons who are incarcerated. As you would recall, a person, including persons who are incarcerated at correctional facilities, also are required to provide their identity document. We had gone through during January and early February to do voter education in these facilities, and where we also asked them to ensure that their families send their IDs to the facility so that they are able to register and as well as to vote. In terms of overall incidences during the process, there weren't much incidences to be reported. Between yesterday morning, there was a shooting out in Mannenberg that I believe led to somebody losing his life. And then yesterday evening also there was a shooting incident, but we don't know details of that. It wasn't at the voting station, and it wasn't somebody that's upset about what was happening at the voting station. But it is still serious, and it's just an indication again of the circumstances under which IEC staff are working, and also to remember that those are the circumstances in many cases which our voters go through almost on a daily basis. But yes, it is unfortunate, but as I said, there was, we are aware of these particular incidences. Also, late last night, there was also an incident outside the offices of the IEC in Mossel Bay, where there was an altercation where a party official wanted to come into our offices. It led to a bit of an altercation because he wasn't authorized to come into our office, and the person was subsequently arrested. Again, he was arrested. We do not know the further details of that because, again, it didn't involve IEC officials. It was something happening outside of our offices in terms of what was happening there. So this is how we are proceeding at this particular stage. It is then difficult for me to give a timeline of when we will get the final results. You'll see they trickle in. Obviously, the results started early hours this morning as the smaller voting districts came in out from Oudtshoorn, Cape Agulhas on the west coast, and in Beaufort West. So those were the very small voting districts, and they were the first ones to come in. And then the trickle started, and then as we're going through the course of the day, those numbers will then also continuously increase. But again, forgive me, but given what happened yesterday, I'm not giving out timelines on the final result, but we hope to finalize it as soon as possible. We hope that we should go over the middle mark before the end of today in terms of captured and verified results, and that will start giving a picture also of the province. As is practice, the IEC doesn't do forecasting or predictions in terms of who we think is going to win the election. We only work with the actual result at the end of the day. We leave that to experts and analysts to do. So that is really where we are now. It's just I thought I want to give you an update and then also, if necessary, deal with some questions. Thank you very much, Leonor.
Okay, we'll start with questions on that side. Please limit yourselves to one question per person so we can all get a chance to do so.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Andile from the SABC. From those incidents that you spoke about, the one in Mannenberg, did in any way had an impact or have an impact, in the voting process in that area?
Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Brenda Leonard from Push Radio. I just want clarity on the number on the results as counted, because maybe I misunderstood what you said. You said 33% of the 1,752 VDs has been counted, but then later on you said you're finalizing 10 still, and I just don't connect those. If you can just clarify that a little bit.
Okay, so in terms of where we, okay, sorry, just get another thing.
Hello, I'm Aisha Ismail from ENCA. When can we expect a final result? No, I'm only joking. I just wanted to ask you, are you able to shed light on an incident that took place in the CBD yesterday when a person, a man, tried to vote twice? And what is the status of this person? And what is he being charged with?
Hi, Marvin from News 24. I just have a question regarding, I've seen a lot of people post of their ballot papers on social media. Was anything reported to the IEC about that? And also, why did it take the IEC in the Western Cape so long to decide on using manual voting systems instead of the digital version?
Can I go with those along? Thank you. So with the Manenberg, there was no impact in terms of our voting because it didn't occur at the voting station. It was in the area of Manenberg, and SAPS had responded to those particular incidences, so there wasn't an impact in terms of that. Yes, in terms of the total, so what I'm saying is if you include the 10, which is still not counted, we are at 30% of the voting districts in already. So it's, if you want to, it's 1572 minus 10, and that's what you see there. So we work on the total because it's easier that way because these voting stations are being finalized incrementally. So maybe within the next hour it will come down to 9, etc. But the overall percentage there is such. The incident in the CBD, I am not aware of the specifics or the charges that will be laid. I think that may be the something which the Deputy Director Public Prosecutions may say, but I'm not aware of the specific charges, etc., that the person will be or his current situation as well. Then we have taking of photos. Yes, in terms of the regulations, everyone is prohibited from taking photos of your ballot paper, the marked ballot paper, because it in effect infringes on the secrecy of the ballot to the extent that you cannot infringe on your own secrecy of the ballot, and it is also a mechanism to prevent persons from taking their photos and going out and possibly saying, look, this is how I voted, maybe there's a reward out there for how I voted. So in that particular regard is how we look at that. In terms of prosecutions of those particular persons, again, that is something which is taken up by our legal services, whether they, depending on the situation, what evidence is available, etc., whether such a person will be charges brought against such individuals. Why did it take the manual process so long? It wasn't a decision for me alone or in this province. As you know, the situation was countrywide. So it was required of a national decision, which was then taken yesterday to cover the whole country, because typically I couldn't have to do a particular process in terms of the voting, which is not in line with what is happening at a national level. So it wasn't something that was particularly only in the Western Cape. It was something taken across the country in order to facilitate the voting process. Bearing in mind that at the end of the day, the VMD device is a tool to assist the process and is not necessarily a legal requirement. The legal requirement in terms of the electoral legislation is that we mark the name of the person off on the hard copy voters roll. So that is your main control sheet, which has always been the case and therefore can remain so. And obviously once we started removing the VMD, the process improved, because you're actually just taking one step out of the process and you're removing a step, which can take up to 10 minutes or so to deal with. And if you extrapolate that over the number of people standing in a queue, you can imagine how long that then becomes over time. Thank you.
We'll take questions on the side of the room now. Zelene?
Hello. Morning. Don't know what time
That can work for me too.
Zelene Merrington from SABC. I'd like to pick up on Aisha's question, please. How would it be possible for a person to even attempt to vote twice?
This is Joy from University of Cape Town. I wanted to just find out why there's been a lot of comments and posts on social media, and just wanting to know why the inconsistencies on whether the 3 ballots were to go into the one box in some places and separate ones in others.
Hi, my name is Megan and I'm from Radio KC. So there's been a lot of confusion about the 3 ballots because some people only got 1 ballot. And as I understand, is if you have moved from one province to another, you only get to vote in you only get 1 ballot. However, some people moved from one district to another and they also only got 1 ballot. How far has the IEC gone in training the officials about the rules of the election?
Any other questions? Michael?
Okay. Thank you. How would somebody vote twice? I really don't know, because given the fact that the person was caught, clearly it makes it difficult for you actually to vote twice. But I don't know how you do that. Whether you take somebody else's ID or I don't know what it want to do. But as is want, because the person was actually then arrested, the mechanisms stopped him from actually working. I wouldn't also want to try and go in here with a thing and give people ideas about what to do. The 3 ballots, yes, what would typically happen is that when it comes to special voting, we only use 1 box because you have an envelope, the double envelope system. And because the envelope goes into 1 box. What was happening in certain of our areas, the presiding officers continued to use 1 box. Now, that doesn't invalidate the process, because remember, you have 3 ballots which are distinct of each other, and even though they are in 1 box, it just means that you make it difficult for yourself when it comes to counting, because you first have to then sort those ballots into the 3 different types, and then you start counting. So there was a bit of a difference of implementation of our practice, but typically the idea is that you will have 3 ballots, and 3 boxes, and voters will then deposit their ballot in each of the 3. But the fact that you have 1 doesn't necessarily invalidate the process. It was that. Why people were given 1 ballot when they were entitled to 3? As I said, typically you are only required to get 1 if you are moving from outside the province and you actually applied for a 24A. Those particular instances where they did happen, as that's part of what we need to investigate, the circumstances under what those occurrences did happen. But typically, and as we made very clear to our training officer, our training is that if you are inside the province and you are voting anywhere inside the province or even at your voting district, you will always get your 3 ballots. It's only when you're coming from outside of the province. So where those were occurring, we'll obviously have to investigate the circumstances, how that particular happened. We also know, however, that in many cases, persons didn't heed our call to actually notify us before the time, by the 17th, and they arrived at the voting station wanting to vote, even though it wasn't the station where they are registered, and they were then refused a ballot. And that also in some ways impacted on the queues that were happening, because people were coming to stations where they couldn't vote and were in line waiting for that. That in no way detracts from the fact that there were a number of voting stations where there were just too long queues and people were waiting just too long. And those are matters that we need to investigate and determine, because in as much as you had stations with very long queues, you also had stations that were going very quick and very smooth. And therefore that's part of what we need to look at and understand. How do we improve on our business processes so that those particular issues do not arrive? As I said previously, our citizens deserve a better service from the IEC, all of our citizens, irrespective of where you are staying, and such shouldn't be happening where you have a situation where citizens are waiting for hours in order to cast a ballot and others do not, in fact, wait so long to cast those ballots. So those particular failures of services on us as the IEC, and we definitely need to work to improve on that.
Any more questions? Okay, one more there.
Hi, Mohammed Vasif, Voice of the Cape. I just want to touch on the long waiting periods and long queues. I know that earlier on the IEC had mentioned that they're expecting that this election would yield a higher turnout in 2019. And would you say that the fact that the IEC perhaps had seen a higher voter turnout could have contributed to the congestion that we saw at polling stations?
Is that it? Oh.
Yeah. I just want to know, there was an incident which happened yesterday. I'm sure all of you guys can remember. The UDM leader, Bantu Bonke Olomisa, his name didn't appear at the voting station that he was voting in, and he was voting there at that particular station for years, but his name didn't appear. And a lot of people experienced that similar problem. I just want to know, how is that possible if you've been voting at this particular station and then your name doesn't appear? How is that possible?
Look, I can't comment on the specifics of General Olomisa. I just don't know what was the situation, whether he reapplied for registration or whatever the case may be. But remember, in the past, whether it's even in local government, it was very easy for you to go to a voting station and vote there. You know, with the previous Section 24A, on election day, you simply produced your ID with your little sticker. Remember, you used to have those stickers, and we say, okay, because you are a registered voter, you could vote there. In 2019 general election, that led to about 1.8 million South Africans voting at places where they were not registered, which created a lot of problems for us in terms of understanding where people will be appearing. And therefore, the law was changed in 2021 to require this prior notification. So having said that, in many cases a person would say, but I've been voting here all along. But in the past it was, even though you were registered somewhere else, you were allowed to do that because we created an exception on election day. That exception to the general rule, which has always been there, is that you always vote where you're registered. The difference is now, instead of having the opportunity to apply to vote at a place different from where you are registered, on election day, you had to apply on, in this case, on the 17th of May. So I don't understand the circumstances of that, but I do know that in many cases people just assume because I'm voting there every year or every 5 years, that is where I'm registered. And we had urged South Africans to always check their voting status and say, where am I registered, check on our website, etc. So again, there's a lot of hypotheticals in terms of that, why somebody would assume that they are registered at a place without checking that in fact they are registered there. Then we have the queues. No, that's not the reason. South Africans are entitled to vote, whether that's high or low turnout. That's not something that we can use as an explanation or an excuse from outside why there's high queues, long queues. That's on us. We need to expect every South African to want to vote, and we need to have our processes ready to receive those South Africans. So I can't use high turnout as an excuse. Not at all.
Afternoon, it's Nezi Swandade from Zibonela FM. I would like to know, before the elections, IEC said you are prepared for the elections. However, I cannot say the same with what I've seen in Kailicha. Some of the voting stations, I'm not sure what preparations were you talking about, because in some stations you will see that the power is tripping, and it's taking a lot of time for them to fix in those stations, and there were long queues. So what preparations are you visiting these stations to see if everything is going to run smoothly, because it has caused delays in some stations?
Any other questions? That's it. Michael?
So yeah, I think one of the valuable lessons to be learned from this, from the IEC side, is the fact that we need to make sure that of the robustness of our user acceptance testing of our devices. All right. Normally, you do a user acceptance test and you check how well it works under certain stressful conditions. In this particular case, for example, the device worked very well over registration weekend. Okay, but there we were only using one application on it, the voters roll. In this particular case, there were a number of applications being used on our voter management device. I'm not saying that that is an excuse. That may be one of the contributing factors. Yes, we need to look at the training of our officials, bearing in mind that the legislation for this election was passed very late. I think it was about 10 days before the election where the president actually signed the last amendment into law. So there's a number of contributing factors. So to the extent that we said we were ready, we went and checked on our venues, we checked that there are electricity. There were cases, for example, that when we get to the venue, when we're checking it out, there is electricity, but in the meantime, the landlord falls behind with the electricity. We had situations out in the Karua where, the landlords, the church or the school, falls behind with Eskom, and then Eskom cuts, and then we need to deal. So those are just some examples. But overall, as I said, is we need to be sure that when we say we are ready, that we have made sure that we understand the conditions under which we say we're going to be ready, if you know what I mean, because you literally have a larger confluence and volume of activity on one particular day. And that is something that we have to take into account and build the robustness into our systems as well as our devices and processes as well. So that's clearly one of the very valuable lessons that we need to take out from this particular process as well.
Any further questions? Okay, if there aren't any, Michael, any final comments from yourself?
Look, I also firstly want to just say thank you to all our election officials. There are election officials that were working through the night. Even now, some of them are still counting. And a lot of these officials are just ordinary South Africans that we contract for these couple of days. They come and work for us for a couple of days. In addition, we have our own IEC staff members that are working still there at the back. And I need to also express my appreciation for the fact that they did put in the hard slogs and have continued and will continue to work. So I am very appreciative of that. Again, also I'm very appreciative, and I must again say that while I am very happy with the turnout of South Africans, I'm also heartened by the commitment of people to stay in the queue in order to vote. And again, that is on us that they had to do that, but it doesn't detract from the fact that you took a lot of committed South Africans who sat or stood for hours in order to vote in these particular things. I also want to say at this particular stage, and I'm not trying to be nice to you guys, but to the political parties generally, the campaign was run very well. Generally, there was compliance to the code of conduct. Talking too much, but just a word to the political parties. I know they've given us a roasting in terms of our performance as well, and rightly so, because they were the contestants. And when this process is done and dusted as well, I have invited them to have a sort of a review session so that we can unpack and see to what extent we can improve on this for the contestants as well, not just the voter. So my appreciation to all the contestants as well in the way in which they conducted them, and then also to the media. This is not the last speech, by the way, but I just needed to say thank you to you guys also, because remember, you were also spreading a lot of the information around the 3 ballots, for example, and a lot of this information. So also to the media, I want to just say thank you to the media and also our partners in terms of assisting us in that particular process as well. Thank you, Lenore.